What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today I'm going to be covering 5 tips to help you succeed in a fantasy draft here in Madden 21. And the reason that we're actually going to be covering this today is because I've gotten a few comments and a few requests to do more fantasy draft related things on the channel, more tips and tricks videos related to it, because a lot of people are playing fantasy drafts to keep Madden interesting. And I don't blame you. You know, fantasy draft is a great way to keep Madden 21 lively and keep things interesting, especially with you and a group of friends. So we're going to jump into my 5 tips here today, just talking a little bit about why I do a couple of different things. And I actually need to find my phone because apparently I misplaced it, and that's where I have my list. Okay, so with that being said, we're going to jump into my 5 tips here. The first tip, and I'm sitting in the middle of a fantasy draft. I'm in round 18, so you guys can see a little bit of my strategy with the fantasy draft, but with that being said, I'm going to do further videos on this, so I might pause this fantasy draft where it's at right now and do another video on it later on. So I think that is worth noting. Real quick, just need to check. Yep. Okay, so with that being said, the first tip that I need to get into is you need to be able to, or you need to specifically draft for age and development and not draft for overall. Just because the game is telling you that a specific player is the right pick does not necessarily mean that it's the right pick. Especially when you get into the later rounds, you're going to be faced with a lot of decisions between picking for guys like, let's say I needed a corner right now or a wide receiver even. I'm going to be forced between picking for an older guy that's like an 81 overall, or I could go down the list and try to find somebody younger that is a little bit lower of an overall. And generally speaking, picking the player that's a lower overall that is younger is the better way to go. You know, I could still get an athletic Trey Flowers here, 25 years old. That would probably be a better pick, and I could probably even find more better picks down below. That's probably a better pick than picking, you know, 34-year-old Aqib Talib, for example. So tip number 1, make sure you guys are drafting for age and development over overall, or over what the CPU is telling you is the right pick. Because when you guys look at my fantasy drafts, you're going to see, especially when I get to a lot of the later rounds, I'm going to start picking guys that are younger with better development, better athletic skills that I can turn into what I want them to be. I can mold them into the players that I want them to be. And so you guys are going to see here in this list that, you know, I have a lot of young players that aren't necessarily super high overalls or anything like that, but they have good development, they're good age, and I can mold them into what I want them to be. Same thing on the defensive side of the ball. Now, with some of your top picks, you're going to get guys like an Aaron Donald that's maybe a little bit older, but provides quite a bit to your team, and so that's what I'm going for there. You know, with your earlier picks, you can kind of afford to do that sometimes if the value is there, if they're an X factor or a superstar, and they're going to hold their value over time, and they're going to be around for a while. But generally speaking, you don't want to pick players that are one and done for your team, because in fantasy draft mode, it's hard to trade for players, especially if you have CPU teams. It's very difficult to trade for players because most teams drafted the way they wanted to draft, and so they don't see themselves as having needs. So it's very difficult to trade for players, so it's difficult to move anybody. So what you draft is what you're going to have for a while until you know, get a little bit deeper into the franchise. So, you know, if you select players that are one and done, that are going to retire after your first year or something like that, you're going to potentially cause yourself some issues because your players are going to be retiring, and you're not going to fill those spots at the same rate that those players are retiring. So that's very important for you guys to know. Tip number 1, make sure you guys are drafting for age and overall. Very, very important. Probably the number 1 tip, and probably something that you already understand, but something that is worth mentioning. Number 2, you need to be able to plan beyond the fantasy draft, and this is just basically going back into the last point. It builds on it. You need to be able to plan for the future. You need to be able to understand what's going to happen in future drafts, which positions are you going to be able to fill in future drafts, and therefore which positions are you able to focus on in your fantasy draft, and which ones should you kind of ignore. So, you know, for example, let's say that I know that generally speaking, Madden provides a lot of good cornerbacks in future draft classes. Well, maybe I don't need to focus so hard on cornerbacks in my draft my fantasy draft, because I know that next year or the year after I'm going to be able to build up a good cornerback core in that draft class, and that's going to be pretty important for you guys. That if you plan ahead, if you look further down the line than the fantasy draft, that's going to help you build a team and be successful over the long run. We always know that there's a ton of wide receivers that are good in pretty much every single draft class, so why focus on wide receivers as one of your top priorities? I generally draft wide receivers last out of any position, and the reason for that is because I know I can pick up speedsters and guys that can be position role players for me right now, that I'm not going to have to worry about that position long term, and therefore I will be able to build that position up over time, and I'm not really worried about it. So that's tip number 2. Make sure you guys are planning past the fantasy draft. That is very important for you guys to be able to do. The next tip that we're going to talk about is prioritizing the positions that you specifically need. A position that you specifically need the most skilled players at. Those are the positions that you need to prioritize. So I've talked about this multiple times. I can get away with a low overall quarterback. I can get away with low overall wide receivers. I could start a 65 overall if I had to, a quarterback, and I would be just fine because I'm good with that position. But I'm not good with other positions. Likewise, for you watching this video, you're good with some positions and you're probably not as good with other positions. So in order to compensate for that and to focus on that, you want to draft players at the positions that you have trouble with. Let's say you need a good quarterback. That's the position you should be focusing on. You should get a quarterback for you as early as possible. But for me, I don't need a good quarterback, so I don't focus on that position. I focus on positions like D-line, trying to get good pass rushers, maybe get at least one lockdown corner or athletic corner on the outside, things like that, a good middle linebacker, for example. I try to focus on those positions a little bit more and focus a little bit less on positions that I am already good at, and I can wait later on in the draft and get a subpar player and do well with them. Now, I got lucky in this draft. I was able to find Tua a little bit later on, but that was in amongst other 75 overall quarterbacks, and so I wasn't picking a good quarterback regardless. That's very important to note, that you want to focus on the players that are going to be most important for you, that are going to help you the most. Tip number 4 on this one, don't be afraid to draft older players at positions that you feel comfortable addressing later on down the line in a franchise. So, for me, for example, let's say I could draft an older player at quarterback to fill that void because I can get one later on in the draft or something like that, and I would be comfortable maybe picking a quarterback later on in the next draft class or 2. Now, part of the thing that plays into this is you can draft older players at positions that other users have loaded up on. And what I mean by that is pay attention, and this is going to lead into tip number 5, but pay attention to what other users are drafting. If they all use their first pick on a quarterback, you can wait on drafting a quarterback. And the reason being is that those players are still going to be available for you. You know that the other users aren't going to take them away from you. And so, let's say, for example, as well, they all draft good quarterbacks. You know that the quarterbacks in next year's draft class are going to be sitting there for you. They're not going to take a quarterback because they don't need a quarterback because they got theirs in their fantasy draft. So this all connects together with planning ahead. Let's say these guys all take good quarterbacks. Well, hey, I can take somebody that's just going to plug and play for now, and then next year I'll draft a quarterback because I know nobody else is going to need one. That is very important for you guys to know, and very important for you guys to get used to doing, is paying attention to what other people are doing in the fantasy draft. And that leads into point number 5, my final point for today, and that is paying attention to what other users are doing, how they're drafting, and adjusting accordingly. This is very important for you guys, because another scenario here is, let's say that they already all took halfbacks, for example. You don't have to jump on the bandwagon of taking that position. Let's say, for example, cornerbacks, in this draft class, a lot of the cornerbacks have taken. I don't need to go in and select a cornerback just because all the other corners have gone off the board. I can adjust accordingly. Like, why would I go in here and draft an 81 overall corner just because all the other high overall corners have gone? adjust to what all the other users are doing in your franchise. What I would say is, okay, they all got their corners already, so I'm just going to wait and draft the most athletic youngster that I can a couple rounds from now, because I know those players will still be there because everybody else already got those players at that position. Likewise with quarterbacks. Let's say everybody already took their quarterback. Okay, no point in me wasting a pick on a quarterback right now, because I know that these guys are just going to be sitting here 10 rounds from now because everybody else has already gotten their quarterback. Halfback is a very important position where you can do this. That's what I did in mine. I waited. A bunch of all these other teams were taking halfbacks early on, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon to take Miles Sanders or Lamar Miller if I'm not comfortable with that. I'm just going to wait, and then I'm going to take the guy that I see fit later on and prioritize drafting positions that matter to me. That's tip number 5. It's very important that you guys don't just jump on the bandwagon because other people are picking that position, because you will be able to find those same players that you might be getting tempted into taking a couple rounds from now. You know what I mean? Just because everybody else is taking a certain position doesn't mean you have to take that position. Adjust to whatever other people are doing, okay? They take the top 10 tight ends off the board, okay? Don't draft a tight end because you're not going to be able to, you're going to be overdrafting one. Go to another position and take away the best player at that position, and then they're going to have to follow suit and take players at that position, and you can even bait other people into making a run on a specific position by taking a high overall player at that position, and then that frees you up to be able to go back in later on and take the picking afterwards, because there are very good players at most of these positions that you can get later on. You don't have to super prioritize a position just because people are drafting it right at that second. That's kind of what happens with quarterbacks early on in the fantasy draft. Everybody's going for a good quarterback because that's what they want to see. They're going for the guys with high potential or the guys that are young. Well, personally speaking, because I don't need a good quarterback, I just wait. I say, you know what? I'm not jumping on the bandwagon of everybody taking a quarterback. I'll go out and get a 99 overall Aaron Donald instead of getting a 75 overall quarterback, and that's going to help me out way more. That's how I play it, okay? If you guys want to see more tips and tricks about fantasy drafts, make sure you guys leave feedback on this video. Leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new. I have 5 more tips already lined up to give you guys in the next video, so if you guys want to see those, make sure you guys hit that like button, and I'll get you guys the next video as soon as possible. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope this helps you guys out in some way, and I hope that it helps you guys see my drafting style and some of the things that I go for. Very important that you guys recognize some of these things if you're doing for fantasy drafts, because it will help you out in the long run. Build a good team, build a successful team, and get more wins. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good night.